Section 2 of the Vedanta Sutras by Badarayana, with a commentary by Shankaracharya, Volume 1, translated by George Thibault. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Introduction, Part 2. Turning next to the Shankarabhashyam itself, we there also meet with indications that the Vedantins were divided among themselves on important points of dogma. These indications are indeed not numerous. Shankara does not on the whole impress one as an author particularly anxious to strengthen his own case by appeals to ancient authorities, a peculiarity of his which later writers of hostile tendencies have not failed to remark and criticize. But yet more than once Shankara also refers to the opinion of another, namely, commentator of the Sutras, and in several places Shankara's commentators explain that the other meant is the Vritikara, about whom more will be said shortly. Those references as a rule concern minor points of exegesis, and hence throw little or no light on important differences of dogma. But there are two remarks of Shankara's at any rate which are of interest in this connection. The one is made with reference to Sutras 7 through 14 of the third pada of the fourth Adhyaya. Some, he says there, declare those sutras, which I look upon as setting forth the Siddhanta view, to state merely the Purvapaksha, a difference of opinion which, as we have seen above, affects the important question as to the ultimate fate of those who have not reached the knowledge of the highest Brahman. And under 1.3.19, Shankara, after having explained at length that the individual soul as such cannot claim any reality, but is real only insofar as it is identical with Brahman, adds the following words: Apare tu vadina paramartikam eva jaivam rupam iti manyante asmadiyas ka kekit. That is, other theorizers again, and among them some of ours, are of opinion that the individual soul as such is real. The term ours, here made use of, can denote only the Upanishads or Vedantins, and it thus appears that Shankara himself was willing to class under the same category himself and philosophers who, as in later times the Ramanujas and others, looked upon the individual soul as not due to the fictitious limitations of Maya, but as real in itself, whatever may be the relation in which they considered it to stand to the highest self. From what precedes, it follows that the Vedantins of the school to which Shankara himself belonged acknowledged the existence of Vedantic teaching of a type essentially different from their own. We must now proceed to inquire whether the Ramanuja system, which likewise claims to be Vedanta and to be founded on the Vedanta Sutras, has any title to be considered an ancient system and the heir of a respectable tradition. It appears that Ramanuja claims, and by Hindu writers is generally admitted, to follow in his Bhashya the authority of Bodhayana, who had composed a vritti on the sutras. Thus we read in the beginning of the Sri Bhashya, Bhagavad Bodhyanakritam Vistirnam Brahma Sutra Vrittim Purvakarya Samkikshipus Tanmatan Usarena SUTRAS Vyakyasyante. Whether the Bodhayana to whom that vritti is ascribed is to be identified with the author of the Kalpa Sutra and other works cannot at present be decided, but that an ancient vritti on the sutras connected with Bodhayana's name actually existed, there is not any reason to doubt. Short quotations from it are met with in a few places of the Sri Bhashya, and as we have seen above, Shankara's commentators state that their author's polemical remarks are directed against the Vritikara. In addition to Bodhayana, Ramanuja appeals to quite a series of ancient teachers, Purvakaryas, who carried on the true tradition as to the teaching of the Vedanta and the meaning of the sutras. In the Vedanta Sangraha, a work composed by Ramanuja himself, we meet in one place with the enumeration of the following authorities: Bodhayana, Tanka, Dramida, Guhadeva, Kapardin, Baruki, and quotations from the writings of some of these are not infrequent in the Vedanta Sangraha, as well as the Sri Bhashya. The author most frequently quoted is Dramida, who composed the Dramida Bhashya. He is sometimes referred to as the Bhashyakara. Another writer repeatedly quoted as the Vakyakara is, I am told, to be identified with the Tanka mentioned above. I refrain from inserting in this place the information concerning the relative age of these writers, which may be derived from the oral tradition of the Ramanuja sect. From another source, however, we receive an intimation that Dramidacharya or Dravidakarya preceded Shankara in point of time. In his Tika on Shankara's Bhashya to the Chandogya Upanishad 3.10.4, Anandagiri remarks that the attempt made by his author to reconcile the cosmological views of the Upanishad with the teaching of Smriti on the same point is a reproduction of the analogous attempt made by the Dravidakarya. It thus appears that that special interpretation of the Vedanta Sutras with which the Sri Bhashya makes us acquainted is not due to innovating views on the part of Ramanuja, but had authoritative representatives already at a period anterior to that of Shankara. This latter point, moreover, receives additional confirmation from the relation in which the so-called Ramanuja sect stands to earlier sects. What the exact position of Ramanuja was, and of what nature were the reforms that rendered him so prominent as to give his name to a new sect, is not exactly known at present. At the same time, it is generally acknowledged that the Ramanujas are closely connected with the so-called Bhagavatas or Pancharatras, who are known to have existed already at a very early time. This latter point is proved by evidence of various kinds. For our present purpose, it suffices to point to the fact that, according to the interpretation of the most authoritative commentators, the last sutras of the second pada of the second adhyaya, Vedanta Sutras, refer to a distinctive tenet of the Bhagavatas, which tenet forms part of the Ramanuja system also, namely that the highest being manifests itself in a fourfold form, vyuha, as Vasudeva, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, Aniruddha, those four forms being identical with the highest self, the individual soul, the internal organ, manas, and the principle of egoity, ahankara. Whether those sutras embody an approval of the tenet referred to, as Ramanuja maintains, or are meant to impugn it, as Shankara thinks, so much is certain that in the opinion of the best commentators, the Bhagavatas, the direct forerunners of the Ramanujas, are mentioned in the sutras themselves, and hence must not only have existed, but even reached a considerable degree of importance at the time when the sutras were composed. And considering the general agreement of the systems of the earlier Bhagavatas and the later Ramanujas, we have a full right to suppose that the two sects were at one also in their mode of interpreting the Vedanta Sutras. The preceding considerations suffice, I am inclined to think, to show that it will by no means be wasted labor to inquire how Ramanuja interprets the sutras and wherein he differs from Shankara. This, in fact, seems clearly to be the first step we have to take, if we wish to make an attempt at least of advancing beyond the interpretations of scholiasts to the meaning of the sutras themselves. A full and exhaustive comparison of the views of the two commentators would indeed far exceed the limits of the space which can here be devoted to that task, and will, moreover, be made with greater ease and advantage when the complete Sanskrit text of the Sri Bhashya has been printed and thus made available for general reference. But meanwhile it is possible, and, as said before, even urged upon a translator of the sutras to compare the interpretations given by the two Bhashyakaras of the sutras which, more than others, touch on the essential points of the Vedanta system. This will best be done in connection with a succinct but full review of the topics discussed in the Adhikaranas of the Vedanta Sutras according to Shankara, a review which, apart from the side glances at Ramanuja's comments, will be useful as a guide through the sutras and the Shankarabhashyam. Before, however, entering on that task, I think it advisable to insert short sketches of the philosophical systems of Shankara as well as of Ramanuja, which may be referred to when later on discrepancies between the two commentators will be noted. In these sketches I shall confine myself to the leading features and not enter into any details. Of Shankara's system we possess as it is more than one trustworthy exposition. It may suffice to refer to Deusson's System of the Vedanta, in which the details of the entire system, as far as they can be learned from the Sutra Bhashya, are represented fully and faithfully, and to Gough's Philosophy of the Upanishads, which, principally in its second chapter, gives a lucid sketch of the Shankara Vedanta founded on the Sutra Bhashya, the Upanishad Bhashyas, and some later writers belonging to Shankara's school. With regard to Ramanuja's philosophy, our chief source was, hitherto, the Ramanuja chapter in the Sarvadarsana Samgraha. The short sketch about to be given is founded altogether on the Sri Bhashya itself. What, in Shankara's opinion, the Upanishads teach is shortly as follows. Whatever is in reality one. There truly exists only one universal being called Brahman or Paramatman, the highest self. This being is of an absolutely homogeneous nature. It is pure being, or, which comes to the same, pure intelligence or thought, Caitanya Jnana. Intelligence or thought is not to be predicated of Brahman as its attribute, but constitutes its substance. Brahman is not a thinking being, but thought itself. It is absolutely destitute of qualities. Whatever qualities or attributes are conceivable can only be denied of it. But if nothing exists but one absolutely simple being, whence the appearance of the world by which we see ourselves surrounded, and in which we ourselves exist as individual beings? Brahman, the answer runs, is associated with a certain power called Maya or Avidya, to which the appearance of this entire world is due. This power cannot be called being, Sat, for being is only Brahman, nor can it be called non-being, Asat, in the strict sense, for it at any rate produces the appearance of this world. It is in fact a principle of illusion, the undefinable cause owing to which there seems to exist a material world comprehending distinct individual existences. Being associated with this principle of illusion, Brahman is enabled to project the appearance of the world in the same way as a magician is enabled by his incomprehensible magical power to produce illusory appearances of animate and inanimate beings. Maya thus constitutes the upadana, the material cause of the world. Or, if we wish to call attention to the circumstance that Maya belongs to Brahman as a Sakti, we may say that the material cause of the world is Brahman insofar as it is associated with Maya. In this latter quality, Brahman is more properly called Ishvara, the Lord. Maya, under the guidance of the Lord, modifies itself by a progressive evolution into all the individual existences, Veda, distinguished by special names and forms, of which the world consists. From it there spring in due succession the different material elements and the whole bodily apparatus belonging to sentient beings. In all those apparently individual forms of existence, the one indivisible Brahman is present, but, owing to the particular adjuncts into which Maya has specialized itself, it appears to be broken up. It is broken up, as it were, into a multiplicity of intellectual or sentient principles, the so-called jivas, individual or personal souls. What is real in each jiva is only the universal Brahman itself. The whole aggregate of individualizing bodily organs and mental functions, which in our ordinary experience separate and distinguish one jiva from another, is the offspring of Maya, and as such unreal. The phenomenal world or world of ordinary experience, vyavahara, thus consists of a number of individual souls engaged in specific cognitions, volitions, and so on, and of the external material objects with which those cognitions and volitions are concerned. Neither the specific cognitions nor their objects are real in the true sense of the word, for both are altogether due to Maya. But at the same time we have to reject the idealistic doctrine of certain Buddhist schools, according to which nothing whatever truly exists, but certain trains of cognitional acts or ideas to which no external objects correspond. For external things, although not real in the strict sense of the word, enjoy at any rate as much reality as the specific cognitional acts whose objects they are. The non-enlightened soul is unable to look through and beyond Maya, which, like a veil, hides from it its true nature. Instead of recognizing itself to be Brahman, it blindly identifies itself with its adjuncts, Upadhi, the fictitious offspring of Maya, and thus looks for its true self in the body, the sense organs, and the internal organ, manas, that is, the organ of specific cognition. The soul, which in reality is pure intelligence, non-active, infinite, thus becomes limited in extent, as it were, limited in knowledge and power, an agent and enjoyer. Through its actions it burdens itself with merit and demerit, the consequences of which it has to bear or enjoy in series of future embodied existences. The Lord, as a retributor and dispenser, allotting to each soul that form of embodiment to which it is entitled by its previous actions. At the end of each of the great world periods called kalpas, the Lord retracts the whole world. That is, the whole material world is dissolved and merged into non-distinct Maya, while the individual souls, free for the time from actual connection with upadhis, lie in deep slumber, as it were. But as the consequences of their former deeds are not yet exhausted, they have again to enter on embodied existence as soon as the Lord sends forth a new material world, and the old round of birth, action, death begins anew to last to all eternity as it has lasted from all eternity. The means of escaping from this endless samsara, the way out of which can never be found by the non-enlightened soul, are furnished by the Veda. The Karmakanda, indeed, whose purport it is to enjoin certain actions, cannot lead to final release, for even the most meritorious works necessarily lead to new forms of embodied existence. And in the Jnanakanda of the Veda also two different parts have to be distinguished, namely, first, those chapters and passages which treat of Brahman insofar as related to the world, and hence characterized by various attributes, that is, of Ishvara or the lower Brahman, and secondly, those texts which set forth the nature of the highest Brahman, transcending all qualities, and the fundamental identity of the individual soul with that highest Brahman. Devout meditation on Brahman, as suggested by passages of the former kind, does not directly lead to final emancipation. The pious worshipper passes on his death into the world of the lower Brahman only, where he continues to exist as a distinct individual soul, although in the enjoyment of great power and knowledge, until at last he reaches the highest knowledge, and through it, final release. That student of the Veda, on the other hand, whose soul has been enlightened by the texts embodying the higher knowledge of Brahman, whom passages such as the great saying, "That art thou," have taught that there is no difference between his true self and the highest self, obtains at the moment of death immediate final release. That is, he withdraws altogether from the influence of Maya, and asserts himself in his true nature, which is nothing else but the absolute highest Brahman. Thus Shankara, according to Ramanuja, on the other hand, the teaching of the Upanishads has to be summarized as follows. There exists only one all-embracing being called Brahman, or the highest self of the Lord. This being is not destitute of attributes, but rather endowed with all imaginable auspicious qualities. It is not intelligence, as Shankara maintains, but intelligence is its chief attribute. The Lord is all-pervading, all-powerful, all-knowing, all-merciful. His nature is fundamentally antagonistic to all evil. He contains within himself whatever exists, while, according to Shankara, the only reality is to be found in the non-qualified homogeneous highest Brahman, which can only be defined as pure being or pure thought, all plurality being a mere illusion. Brahman, according to Ramanuja's view, comprises within itself distinct elements of plurality which all of them lay claim to absolute reality of one and the same kind. Whatever is presented to us by ordinary experience, namely matter in all its various modifications and the individual souls of different classes and degrees, are essential real constituents of Brahman's nature. Matter and souls, akit and kit, constitute, according to Ramanuja's terminology, the body of the Lord. They stand to him in the same relation of entire dependence and subserviency in which the matter forming an animal or vegetable body stands to its soul or animating principle. The Lord pervades and rules all things which exist, material or immaterial, as the Antaryaman, the fundamental text for this special Ramanuja tenet, which in the writings of the sect is quoted again and again, is the so-called Antaryaman Brahmana, which says that within all elements, all sense organs, and, lastly, within all individual souls, there abides an inward ruler whose body those elements, sense organs, and individual souls constitute. Matter and souls, as forming the body of the Lord, are also called modes of him, prakara. They are to be looked upon as his effects, but they have enjoyed the kind of individual existence which is theirs from all eternity, and will never be entirely resolved into Brahman. They, however, exist in two different, periodically alternating conditions. At sometimes they exist in a subtle state, in which they do not possess those qualities by which they are ordinarily known, and there is then no distinction of individual name and form. Matter in that state is unevolved, avyakta. The individual souls are not joined to material bodies, and their intelligence is in a state of contraction, non-manifestation, sankoka. This is the pralaya state, which recurs at the end of each kalpa, and Brahman is then said to be in its causal condition, karanavasta. To that state all those scriptural passages refer which speak of Brahman or the self as being in the beginning one only, without a second. Brahman, then, is indeed not absolutely one, for it contains within itself matter and souls in a germinal condition, but as in that condition they are so subtle as not to allow of individual distinctions being made, they are not counted as something second in addition to Brahman. When the pralaya state comes to an end, creation takes place owing to an act of volition on the Lord's part. Primary unevolved matter then passes over into its other condition. It becomes gross, and thus acquires all those sensible attributes, visibility, tangibility, and so on, which are known from ordinary experience. At the same time, the souls enter into connection with material bodies corresponding to the degree of merit or demerit acquired by them in previous forms of existence. Their intelligence at the same time undergoes a certain expansion, vikasa. The Lord, together with matter in its gross state and the expanded souls, is Brahman in the condition of an effect, karyavasta. Cause and effect are thus at the bottom the same, for the effect is nothing but the cause which has undergone a certain change, parinama. Hence, the cause being known, the effect is known likewise. Owing to the effects of their former actions, the individual souls are implicated in the samsara, the endless cycle of birth, action, and death, final escape from which is to be obtained only through the study of the Jnana Kanda of the Veda. Compliance with the injunctions of the Karma Kanda does not lead outside the samsara, but he who, assisted by the grace of the Lord, cognizes and meditates on him in the way prescribed by the Upanishads, reaches at his death final emancipation. That is, he passes through the different stages of the path of the gods up to the world of Brahman, and there enjoys an everlasting blissful existence from which there is no return into the sphere of transmigration. The characteristics of the released soul are similar to those of Brahman. It participates in all the latter's glorious qualities and powers, excepting only Brahman's power to emit, rule, and retract the entire world. The chief points in which the two systems sketched above agree on the one hand and diverge on the other may be shortly stated as follows. Both systems teach Advaita, that is, non-duality or monism. There exist not several fundamentally distinct principles, such as the Prakriti and the Purushas of the Sankhya's, but there exists only one all-embracing being. While, however, the Advaita taught by Shankara is a rigorous absolute one, Ramanuja's doctrine has to be characterized as Visishta Advaita, that is, qualified non-duality with a difference. According to Shankara, whatever is Brahman, and Brahman itself is absolutely homogeneous, so that all difference and plurality must be illusory. According to Ramanuja also, whatever is Brahman, but Brahman is not of a homogeneous nature, but contains within itself elements of plurality, owing to which it truly manifests itself in a diversified world. The world, with its variety of material forms of existence and individual souls, is not unreal Maya, but a real part of Brahman's nature, the body investing the universal self. The Brahman of Shankara is in itself impersonal, a homogeneous mass of objectless thought, transcending all attributes. A personal God it becomes only through its association with the unreal principle of Maya, so that, strictly speaking, Shankara's personal God, his Ishvara, is himself something unreal. Ramanuja's Brahman, on the other hand, is essentially a personal God, the all-powerful and all-wise ruler of a real world permeated and animated by his spirit. There is thus no room for the distinction between a Param Nirgunam and an Aparam Sagunam Brahma, between Brahman and Ishvara. Shankara's individual soul is Brahman insofar as limited by the unreal upadhis due to Maya. The individual soul of Ramanuja, on the other hand, is really individual. It has indeed sprung from Brahman and is never outside Brahman, but nevertheless it enjoys a separate personal existence and will remain a personality forever. The release from samsara means, according to Shankara, the absolute merging of the individual soul in Brahman, due to the dismissal of the erroneous notion that the soul is distinct from Brahman. According to Ramanuja, it only means the soul's passing from the troubles of earthly life into a kind of heaven or paradise where it will remain forever in undisturbed personal bliss. As Ramanuja does not distinguish a higher and lower Brahman, the distinction of a higher and lower knowledge is likewise not valid for him. The teaching of the Upanishads is not twofold, but essentially one, and leads the enlightened devotee to one result only. I now proceed to give a conspectus of the contents of the Vedanta Sutras according to Shankara, in which at the same time all the more important points concerning which Ramanuja disagrees will be noted. We shall here have to enter into details which to many may appear tedious, but it is only on a broad substratum of accurately stated details that we can hope to establish any definite conclusions regarding the comparative value of the different modes of interpretation which have been applied to the sutras. The line of investigation is an entirely new one, and for the present nothing can be taken for granted or known. In stating the different heads of discussion, the so-called adhikaranas, each of which comprises one or more sutras, I shall follow the subdivision into adhikaranas adopted in the Vyasadika Ranamala, the text of which is printed in the second volume of the Bibliotheca Indica edition of the Sutras. End of section 2.